20 years of neglect, 20 years without a family holiday. A father betrayed and lost everything overnight. But then, when I became a millionaire from a single game, the son I hadn't contacted for 20 years suddenly called and invited me to celebrate Halloween. Will the gift I prepared be a sweet one, or a much more bitter trick? If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, or the hollow ache of being forgotten, then listen close. This is a story of a son who suddenly remembered his father's name, not for love, but for money. The phone's shrill ring shattered the quiet of my small Brooklyn apartment. It was a Monday evening, a routine night just like any other, but the sound was anything but normal. I'd almost forgotten the feeling of the phone ringing, especially when a familiar number flashed on the screen. Hesitantly, I picked it up. A long exhale. Dad! The voice was a ghost from the past. A stranger's voice, a jolt straight to my heart. It was Alex, my son. 20 years of silence. And suddenly he remembered my name. I was wondering if you'd like to come to our Halloween party, he said, his voice laced with an unnatural cheerfulness. He wanted me to join his family's celebration. A cold, bitter thought crossed my mind. This Halloween, the line between treats and tricks was about to blur, and I had no intention of bringing any candy. The phone's silence after the call was more deafening than its ring. It wasn't the sound of an ending, but the echo of a beginning. A beginning that had started 20 years ago, and now, finally, had a chance at an end. The ghost of that old life, a life I had buried, was rising again, and with it came the memories. The sting of those 2 decades faded, and the ache of the first day, the day everything was stolen, returned with a raw clarity. My name is Arthur, and back then, my world wasn't a small apartment in Brooklyn, but a brownstone in Queens, filled with the promise of a future I was building with my own hands. My game, Cybergenesis, wasn't just code and design. It was my masterpiece, a groundbreaking concept that would change the industry. Clara, my wife, had been my biggest cheerleader, or so I thought. She introduced me to her new business partner, a man named Marcus with a silver tongue and an expensive suit. He saw the potential, he said, and offered to handle the business side, leaving me free to create. I was a fool, a trusting fool. The betrayal was swift and brutal. Documents were signed, agreements were twisted, and my life's work was stolen, leaving me with nothing. But the theft of my game was only a wound. The real trauma was when I looked into my son's eyes. Alex was just 18, old enough to choose, and he did. "Mom's right," he'd said, his voice cold and devoid of all the warmth I'd ever known. "You're just a dreamer, Dad. Marcus can give us the life we deserve." Those words cut deeper than any lawyer's pen. I lost my family, my home, my work, everything. They walked away, leaving me with a small box of belongings and an emptiness that felt as permanent as the New York skyline. I moved into this humble apartment, a man broken not by failure, but by the very people I had loved. That Halloween, 20 years ago, was the loneliest of my life. My only costume was the mask of a man who had lost everything, but they never saw the other costume I was wearing, the one of a man who was quietly, patiently, waiting for his moment to return. 2 years ago, our masterpiece, the new Cybergenesis, was ready. Sarah and I released it under an anonymous shell corporation we'd been building for years. There was no fanfare, no big press release, just a quiet upload to the world's biggest gaming platform. The silence lasted for about a week, and then, the explosion, the game went viral. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. My story, the anonymous developer who came out of nowhere with a masterpiece, was everywhere. The media became obsessed with the mysterious Arthur, a ghost of the industry who had returned to claim his place. The news was impossible to ignore. It even reached the gilded cage of Manhattan. Alex, my son, was sitting on the couch in his lavish penthouse, scrolling through his phone when a news alert flashed on his screen. Anonymous game developer becomes multimillionaire overnight. He scoffed, ready to dismiss it as another generic success story. But then he saw the details. A revolutionary new coding engine, a sequel to a game that never was. His heart skipped a beat. He looked up at Clara, his mother, who was sitting across the room, her face tight with worry over their impending financial collapse. "Mom," he said, his voice a whisper, Cybergenesis. That was Dad's game, the one he was working on when we left. Clara's face, usually a mask of calm composure, paled. That's impossible. Marcus took that idea. That was his. This is different, Alex insisted, his fingers flying across his tablet, pulling up news articles, screenshots, interviews with critics. The praise was universal, the money was in the millions. And the developer's name? The one who coded the entire engine from scratch? Arthur. My name. The name they had forgotten. The realization hit them like a physical blow. The deadbeat dad they had abandoned was now a mogul. The man who was just a dreamer was a multimillionaire, and they were broke, facing ruin. For 20 years they had built a life on lies, believing they were the winners. But a ghost had returned to haunt them, not with anger, but with unimaginable wealth. That's when the calls began. Not out of love, not out of a sudden pang of guilt, but out of pure, undiluted greed. The text messages were a blur of fake apologies and emotional manipulation, all leading to one thing: a request for a meeting, a reunion. The call I received on that Monday evening wasn't a casual invitation to a party. It was a lifeline, a desperate, calculated attempt to reconnect with the man they had left for dead. I was wondering if you'd like to come to our Halloween party, he'd said, his voice full of an unnatural cheerfulness. He was inviting me to their home, their world, hoping I would bring my new fortune with me. He was about to find out that this Halloween, I had no intention of bringing any candy. 2 years ago, our masterpiece, the new Cybergenesis, was ready. Sarah and I launched it under an anonymous shell corporation we'd been building for years. There was no fanfare, no big press release. Just a quiet upload to the world's biggest gaming platform. The silence lasted for about a week. And then, the explosion. The game went viral. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. Critics praised its depth, its story, its immersive world. Players couldn't get enough. The money came rolling in. Not in small increments, but in waves. Soon, I was no longer a man living paycheck to paycheck in a small Brooklyn apartment. I was a millionaire, a tech mogul, a king in the world I had created from the ashes of my old life. The news was impossible to ignore. My story, the anonymous game developer who came out of nowhere with a masterpiece, was everywhere. It was only a matter of time before it found its way to Manhattan. And it did. The phone call was just the beginning. A few days later, a text message arrived, then another. A nervous, fumbling message from Alex, full of half apologies and veiled suggestions of a family reunion. He spoke of making up for lost time and the importance of family. I almost laughed. After 20 years of silence, his sudden emotional urgency was as transparent as cheap plastic. But I wasn't just sitting around waiting for them. The methodical nature that had made me a successful game developer also made me a meticulous investigator. With Sarah's help and the resources of my newfound wealth, I began to dig. I uncovered the spectacular failure of Alex's business, ventures a string of scams and empty promises that had left a trail of burned investors and millions in debt. I discovered Clara's lavish lifestyle, funded not by her ex-lover's wealth as she claimed, but by her own carefully constructed network of lies and financial fraud. They were drowning, and they saw me as their only lifeboat. The Halloween invitation was the final piece of the puzzle. It was a clear, desperate plea for a handout, a treat for them. I saw the trap they were setting, but I knew, this time, I wasn't the one walking into it. I smiled to myself, looking out my window at the city lights. This Halloween, I was going to bring them a surprise they would never forget. Not with money, but with something far more valuable, the truth. The hum of the taxi engine brought me back from the ghosts of my past. 20 years of memories, of a life stolen and a son's betrayal, vanished as the car pulled up to a glass tower in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood. My life's work, my anger, my solitude, it all led to this very night, this Halloween. A doorman, in an expensive suit, greeted me, his eyes scanning my modest clothes with a flicker of condescension. This was their world now, a world of polished marble and cold steel. The penthouse was a shrine to opulence, all minimalist furniture and abstract art. Alex and Clara were in the middle of a small, lavish Halloween party. Alex was dressed as a startup guru, a costume that was more of a desperate attempt at branding than a joke. Clara, with her expensive gown, was playing the part of a grieving widow, a lie I knew all too well. They greeted me with wide, unnatural smiles, as if 2 decades of silence were nothing more than a minor misunderstanding. The atmosphere was thick with pretense. Their friends, an eclectic mix of venture capitalists and art dealers, eyed me with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. I was a ghost in my own family's party. As the night wore on, Alex's performance began. He steered me away from the crowd, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He talked about the challenges of the tech world, the unforeseen market downturns, and the ruthless nature of investors. He was building his case, one pathetic excuse at a time, for the money he so desperately needed. Clara, with her own well-rehearsed act, chimed in with a wistful sigh, lamenting her financial struggles since her partner had mysteriously disappeared. I listened patiently, a quiet observer, but my silence wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a loaded gun. And then I fired the first shot. I brought up an old memory, a story about the night Clara's partner, Marcus, had first approached me with the deal. Clara's face, for a brief second, went pale. Alex, however, was oblivious. He just rolled his eyes. "Dad, that was all so long ago." I smiled, a cold, empty smile. "Long ago indeed," I said, "but some ghosts never truly rest." I looked at Clara, and she looked back at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You know, Alex," I continued, my voice barely a whisper, "your mother wasn't as strong as you thought she was back then. Sometimes, even the people you trust the most are forced to play a role they hate just to survive." Alex looked from me to his mother, a strange confusion clouding his face. He didn't understand. But Clara did. Her carefully constructed facade was starting to crack, and this was just the beginning of her Halloween nightmare. Alex, still dazed by my revelation about Clara, turned his attention back to the matter at hand. "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about, but please, this is a time-sensitive investment. I need your help. $300,000, just a small fraction of your fortune," he went on, his voice a frantic, desperate hum. I let him talk, watching his performance, a desperate dance on the edge of a cliff. I took a sip of my drink, the ice clinking against the glass, a sound of cold finality. I calmly set the glass down. "I know all about your investment, Alex," I said, my voice cutting through his sales pitch. "I know about the investors you burned, the promises you couldn't keep, and the millions in debt you've accumulated. All of it is right here." I pulled a thin, elegant tablet from my bag. The screen glowed with spreadsheets, bank records, and legal documents. Alex's face went white, the color draining from it completely. "What is this? This is an invasion of privacy, Dad," he stammered, his eyes darting from the tablet to my face. "An invasion of privacy?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "Or a reality check? For 20 years you ignored me. For 20 years you lived in this fantasy world built on lies and other people's money. It was time for a reckoning." I looked at Clara, her eyes wide with fear. "And as for your mother's schemes, the fake charities, the lies, I have that here too." I gestured to the tablet. "The truth is a powerful thing, Alex. It's the one thing you can't buy, and the one thing you can't outrun." Clara, her composure completely gone, grabbed Alex's arm. "Arthur, don't do this. He's your son." "He's a scam artist, Clara. A reflection of the world you taught him to live in," I said, turning my gaze back to her. "And the biggest trick of all? I'm not here to give you money. I'm here to give you something you've both earned. For the last week, I've been meticulously compiling all of this information. I've sent it all to the authorities, every failed company, every defrauded investor, every lie. The police have everything they need." The doorbell rang. Not the playful chime of a trick-or-treater, but a sharp, authoritative knock. A wave of raw panic washed over Alex's face. He looked at me, a flicker of dawning horror in his eyes. He realized the game was over. I had been playing it all along. He tried to run, to scramble away from the inevitable, but it was too late. I walked to the door and opened it. 2 officers in uniform stood on the other side, their faces grim. "Alex Brooks?" one of them asked, his gaze sweeping the now silent room. "We have a warrant for your arrest. fraud, and illegal investment practices. I stepped aside, letting them into the penthouse. The music of the party died down. Whispers turned to gasps. The other guests stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and shock. Clara screamed, a high-pitched, pathetic sound as they put handcuffs on her son. I looked at the two of them, a mother and son, standing in the wreckage of their lives. I was a ghost at their party, but tonight they would be haunted for real. I turned and walked away, a man finally free from his past. The silence in the hallway was deafening. After 20 years of being a ghost in their lives, I was finally, truly gone. I walked out of the penthouse and into the silent hallway. The muffled sounds of the Halloween party, now a crime scene, faded into the background. The elevator doors opened, and as I descended, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. It wasn't the burden of anger or hatred. It was the heavy cloak of waiting, of being tied to a past that had defined me for too long. For 20 years, they had haunted me. Now, on this Halloween night, I had turned the tables, and I was the ghost who left. The New York night air was crisp and cool. I looked up at the moon, a sliver of silver hanging above the city's neon glow. I wasn't celebrating a victory. The truth was, there was no joy in watching the ruin of my own son, the devastation on Clara's face. The taste in my mouth was not sweet revenge, but a bittersweet mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. For so long, I believed justice would be the ultimate prize. I believed that seeing them fall would finally make me whole. But as I walked the quiet streets of Brooklyn, a different realization settled into my bones. The revenge wasn't in their punishment, it was in my journey. It was in the nights I spent coding, the years I spent building, the person I had become in their absence. My worth wasn't tied to their approval or their money. It was tied to my own resilience, my own hard work, my own quiet dignity. They had robbed me of my game, my family, and my future. But in doing so, they had given me a gift, the gift of starting over. The penthouse, the lavish party, the designer clothes. All of it was a lie, an empty shell, just like the lives they had built. The emptiness I left in their lives tonight was a mirror of the emptiness they had left in mine 2 decades ago. But unlike them, I was walking away from the emptiness and towards a new beginning. The weeks that followed Halloween were a quiet revolution in my life. The phone calls from reporters and lawyers, the headlines about the anonymous game mogul and the Halloween fraud were a constant presence, but they felt distant, like a story happening to someone else. I wasn't defined by the drama anymore. Instead, I found a new purpose, a new rhythm. With Sarah's help, I started a small mentoring program for young, aspiring game developers in Brooklyn. We rented a small loft, filled it with computers and whiteboards, and every day the space buzzed with a creative energy I hadn't felt in decades. These kids weren't interested in my money, they were hungry for my knowledge, for the wisdom I had gained through 20 years of quiet work. I was Arthur, the mentor, the guide. Not Arthur, the victim. The news of Alex's downfall was impossible to avoid. It was all over the news, a cautionary tale about greed and ambition. His bail was set high, the lawsuits were piling up, and his supposed business empire had crumbled into dust. The penthouse, the expensive furniture, the luxury cars, all of it was seized, liquidated to pay off his mounting debts. I learned, through Sarah's extensive network, that Clara had left the city, abandoning Alex to face the music alone. The son who had chosen his mother's wealth over his father's love was now left with neither, a bitter irony that settled in the pit of my stomach. His phone calls started within a week of the arrest. They came at all hours, an insistent, desperate barrage of notifications. At first they were filled with anger and accusations, blaming me for everything, screaming about how I had ruined his life. Then they shifted. The anger gave way to pleas, to desperate promises of repayment and loyalty, to pathetic attempts at emotional manipulation. In one voicemail, I could hear him weeping, his voice a raw, broken sound. "Dad, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. The lawyers are vultures. I have nothing left. Please, you have to help me. Just tell me what to do. I'm lost." The words were not a request for money, but a desperate cry from a child who had finally realized he was alone. I deleted them all without listening to the end. The silence was my choice now, my power. For 20 years I had yearned for a single call, a single sign that he still remembered me. Now that the calls were coming, I ignored them. I was turning the tables, letting him feel the cold, hollow ache of being forgotten. But as the weeks stretched on, I began to feel a strange emptiness in my victory. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about seeing him broken and realizing that a broken child, even at 38 years old, was still a child. My revenge felt hollow. I needed to see him, not for a confrontation, but for a final answer. A final chance to see if the boy I once knew was still buried somewhere beneath the wreckage of the man he had become. The calls from him, once a sign of desperation, had become a signal that the time for the final trick and the final conversation had arrived. The coffee shop was just a few blocks from my apartment, a small, unassuming place with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans. It was a world away from the gilded cage of Manhattan. I arrived early, watching the street traffic, waiting for him. When Alex walked through the door, my heart ached with a strange mix of emotions. He was a ghost of the man who had stood in that penthouse, his expensive suit replaced by a simple jacket, his face thin and drawn, his eyes hollow. He looked at me, not with the arrogance of the past, but with the weary eyes of a man who had lost everything. He sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. "Dad," he finally said, his voice a low, broken rasp. "I'm sorry. I really am. I was wrong about everything. About you. About Mom. About money. I thought that was all that mattered." He didn't mention the money, not yet. He spoke about his time in jail, the lawsuits, the loneliness. He was speaking not from a script, but from a place of raw, unadulterated pain. "I didn't call you for money, Dad," he continued, looking me in the eyes for the first time. "I called you because I needed my father. I needed someone to tell me what to do." This was it, the moment I had waited 20 years for, a genuine confession, a plea not for riches, but for guidance. I leaned forward, my voice soft but firm. "You're right, Alex. You made a lot of mistakes, but you're not the only one. 20 years ago, your mother was given a choice by a man who had manipulated her. Choose him and wealth, or choose me and ruin. She chose him, but she lived in fear and regret ever since. You, my son, were given a choice too, and you chose her lie over my truth. You chose a life of empty promises over a life of hard work. And now, you've lost it all. That's the bitter truth of it." Alex's face crumpled. The shame and despair were etched into every line. He looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the boy I once knew, the boy who used to play catch with me in the park. "So what now?" "I have nothing. I'm ruined. I'm finished." "Finished?" I asked. "Number, you're only just beginning. The money you so desperately wanted, the millions from cybergenesis, it's all gone." His head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What? What do you mean it's gone?" "It's gone," I repeated, a small, sad smile on my lips. "I didn't bring it to the Halloween party because it wasn't mine to give. I donated all of it. Every last cent went to a foundation to help young, honest developers get their start in the industry so they would never have to be a victim like me. You wanted a reward for being my son? You wanted to get rich without lifting a finger? Well, that Halloween, you got the trick. You got nothing." Alex sat there, stunned, broken. His head dropped into his hands. I let the silence hang, letting the full weight of my words settle on him. Then I spoke again, my voice softer. "But there's something else. A reward for the man who you might still be. I need a director for this foundation. Someone who knows what it's like to build something from nothing, and someone who knows the dangers of ambition without ethics. You've learned that the hard way. The job is yours, Alex. It's a chance to build something real, a chance to help people who are just like the old me. The money's not for you, but the purpose is. The question is, are you ready to earn it?" Alex sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. The coffee in my mug grew cold. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He just stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I wasn't angry. I was just empty. I had given him the ultimate choice, a chance to build a real life. Had I been a fool to think he would take it? For 2 days, there was nothing. The familiar silence, the one I had chosen, was back. I began to wonder if he had chosen his old life of lies and manipulation again. But on the third day, my phone rang. It was Alex. His voice was different. Not desperate, not manipulative. Just quiet. "Dad," he said, "I think I'm ready." And so it began. The first few weeks were not easy. The loft we rented for the foundation was a world away from the penthouse he'd lost. There was no valet, no concierge, just the gritty reality of Brooklyn. Alex, the man who was used to giving orders, found himself taking them. He was used to lavish lunches and empty promises, not the long hours of work and the genuine humility it takes to build something meaningful. He made mistakes. He tried to take shortcuts, relying on the cunning that had served him so well in the past. But each time, I was there to guide him, to remind him that this wasn't about quick wins. This was about purpose. This was about earning a different kind of reward, one that couldn't be measured in dollars. Our relationship wasn't instantly healed. There were awkward silences and difficult conversations. One evening, after the last of the developers had gone home, we sat alone in the quiet loft. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry for all of it, for believing Mom's lies, for abandoning you, for not being there." It was the first genuine apology I had ever heard from him, and the words, so simple, felt heavier than any lawsuit. The anger and bitterness I had carried for 20 years began to fade, replaced by a quiet, steady pride. I told him the truth about his mother, about how she had been a victim too, and he finally understood. He finally saw the complexity of the people in his life, and not just the roles they played. I watched him learn to code again, not from a place of arrogance, but from a place of curiosity. I watched him listen to the stories of the young developers we were mentoring, their struggles and their hopes mirroring my own all those years ago. He wasn't just a director, he was becoming a mentor himself. He was learning to listen. He was learning to be patient. He was learning to be a man I could finally respect. My revenge wasn't the Halloween party. It wasn't the sight of him in handcuffs. It was this quiet, daily act of rebuilding a son, and in doing so, rebuilding a part of myself that I thought was lost forever. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about accepting it and choosing to write a different future. I had spent 2 decades waiting for the chance to punish him, but I discovered that the most profound act of power I could ever wield was the power to forgive, and to offer him a path to redemption he never deserved, but desperately needed. I watched him from my desk, a 38-year-old man, hunched over a keyboard, a flicker of genuine passion in his eyes. He was building something real, something that would help others. And in that moment, I knew that my wealth, my game, my revenge, none of it mattered as much as the man sitting across from me, the man I was finally getting to know again. The silence between us now was not an empty void, but a peaceful space filled with understanding and hard-earned respect. It was the best reward a father could ever ask for. To you, our listeners, I want to leave you with a thought. Life, at its core, is a constant struggle between holding on to anger and choosing to let it go. We often believe that revenge is a sweet reward, but as I have learned, the true victory lies in finding peace. My path to peace was long and hard, but it led me to a place where I could see my son not as the man who had wronged me, but as a man who deserved a second chance. The world will tell you to seek an eye for an eye, but true power comes from the ability to forgive, to accept that some wounds can never be fully healed, but they can be transcended. This isn't just my story. It is a profound family story of betrayal and forgiveness. Remember, God's grace is found in the moments when we choose love over bitterness. This isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a testament to the power of a family story to reshape lives. It's about how even the deepest betrayals can lead to the most profound redemptions. And I believe that God guides us through our darkest hours, offering us a path back to the light, a path I found with my son. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness, but a divine strength that sets you free, allowing you to move forward. This, I believe, is what God truly wants for all of us. This incredible family story is now yours to share. If you were moved by our journey, if you believe in the power of forgiveness, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more stories of truth and redemption. What did you think of Arthur's choice? Leave your thoughts and your own family story in the comments below. We would love to hear from you.